Aloha and welcome to Goddess Unleashed. This is Diane Vick, and on today's episode, I am interviewing Catherine Paour. And she is one of the authors that is in the Crappy to Happy series with me. And I'm excited to bring her on this show, not only because her website is so awesome and there's so many things that align with what I do, but I believe as someone that has suffered so many chronic illnesses and so many diseases, and that the stories that are out there of people that have made it through really need to get to the population around us, because everyone's feeling so stressed out right now. And that triggers the stress response in our bodies, and it can make our bodies completely fall apart as that stress response stays on mode when we are constantly fighting that stress around us. And I know a lot of people are feeling stressed out right now just because of all the civil unrest that's happening, the quarantine that we're in. So I want to definitely bring inspiration in here with Catherine. So I'm going to show you Catherine now. I want her to explain a little bit about who she is and her story in Crappy to Happy.
Oh, Diane, thank you so much for having me join you. It's really been a pleasure to get to know some of the work that you do and how in alignment we are with each other with some of our stories. I'm born and raised in Torrance, California, and I've been here 60 years this month, actually. My family's been in Torrance for over 100 years, and I am retired from corporate. I used to work for a medical center, 20 years in public relations, and then 15 years for a Japanese automaker, until I found out that I would not be able to return to work due to my health challenges that I had suffered with since the very day I was born. I think your question was, why am I in Crappy to Happy? I just feel like I have a story to be told, not only from the point of view from being a woman and trying to help other women to listen to their bodies and understand that we know when there's something wrong with our bodies, but also to raise awareness of that. It's always so important to get a second opinion. I know that there are many medical professionals in the environment today, in the world today, and there are specialties, but just because somebody specializes in something doesn't mean that they're going to be the cure-all and the end-all. That there's always another opinion to be found. And if I didn't go out and seek another opinion, I probably would not be here today. So that's how I ended up wanting to share my story in Crappy to Happy.
Well, that is amazing. And I agree with you. I think the advocating for yourself and going outside the box sometimes, because that's what I try to do in this podcast, is really bring things in from the alternative realm and also the conventional realm. But in order to do that, you have to advocate for your health. You have to go out there and seek information. And sometimes that means going to a lot of specialists. I have been to a gazillion on my journey to where I'm at. And thankfully, I'm not taking any more prescriptions, but it used to be a time where I lived at doctor's office and I kept going to get other opinions to figure out what was going on, until finally I decided some light bulb switch went on, and I said, I need to go to a geneticist and figure out what is going on with me, because there's no way that someone that is 35 years old, now at this point 42, has so many things going on in her body that everything is shutting down, that there's not a connection. So I think advocacy is a huge part. Sometimes you need to find friends in your area or family members that know a little bit about medicine to help guide you where to go, so then you can go that extra step and advocate for yourself. So I love that you're sharing your story. And I know sometimes to share the story, it can actually be a little bit overwhelming. For you to come out like this and share the story of your journey, was there any kind of a stress response going on in your body?
Never. I've always been an open book from a very early age. I went through a very traumatic experience 20 years ago with my son. And probably the day after my traumatic experience with my son happened, we were advocating and sharing and going public with radio interviews, with news coverage, authoring a law. So I've always had that advocate spirit in me. I've always had that feeling of we need to, when there's unjust with something that's happening with our body or with our babies, we need to not be silent, because we can make change happen, but we can also help other people. And so I've never been afraid to share my story, never.
That's amazing. And I'm so proud of you that you have that gift within you, because for me, it was really a lot of effort, like a lot of people that have been following my show, they know my biggest fears was the fear of being heard and the fear of being seen, because as a child actually made me hide all my from the world, which meant I didn't speak up for myself and I didn't stand out like I am right now. So I think it's amazing that you have that in you and you've been pushing towards this all this time.
Yes.
One that I noticed when I was looking at your website is the wholehearted and courage. I think courage is so important. And the fact that you use a heart is like my absolute favorite. I don't know if you know, but when I wrote my book, I actually did a little drawing to inspire me. And my favorite shape is the heart. And in the middle, I wrote the word love. So tell us a little bit about how you came about coming up with this little title and, you know, your journey towards Wholehearted.
Well, you know, like you, as a young girl, I was always drawing hearts, and I always liked pink hearts. And, you know, I've always had heart problems from a very early age, but never really knew what they were. And so through my 30s and 40s, I went through a series of a lot of heart issues with a lot of cardiac ablations where they zap the arrhythmia, the misfiring in the heart. And I've had restarts of the heart, and I've always had heart complications going on throughout my life, but nobody ever had an answer for them. So it was really easy for me to connect my love of hearts with how am I experiencing these heart issues all my life. So when I was working on wanting to create a personal brand for myself, there was no question about it. It was going to be a heart. And then my story was about my heart. And then, of course, as we're going to find out later on in this interview, how I found out that I had a hole in my heart that went undetected for 55 years. So all of a sudden it's like, well, obviously it's my whole heart, and whole heart is HOLE. So I had 5 or 6 variations of the heart with the hole in it. And then I decided at the very end that I wanted to add kind of like that medical cross in it, because I didn't want it to be perceived as a hole in my heart from a lost relationship or a broken heart. This was more of a medical situation. So Wholehearted Courage was born. I started off with Catherine's Courage, and then I'm like, I didn't want my name attached to it. So Wholehearted Courage totally made sense. And that launched my little brand. And here I am today, and happy to happy, sharing my whole heart. HOLE, heart.
I love it. And I love the story and the power that you brought into it and really aligned it and made it your own. And I know that you want to talk about this hole in your heart. And I remember reading on your paper on open heart surgery. When I was in nursing school, that was the most impressive surgery I've ever seen. It was an eye opener, and it gave me chills down my spine, because I can't imagine the amount of recovery and the impact that it has on the body when you go through something so significant. And I know you had a lot of complications in your surgery. So can you tell them a little bit about that procedure and what transpired after it?
Sure. Well, first of all, when most people hear of open heart surgery, they think of somebody that has heart disease, that has blocked arteries or a faulty valve. My situation was very different. I had a gigantic hole in my heart, which is called an atrial septal defect, which is actually a congenital heart defect. And again, it went undiagnosed for 55 years, although I was suffering at a very early age with congestive heart failure and all these other issues. And, you know, really short of breath and fatigue and edema and just on and on and on. So the open heart surgery was actually the only way that they were going to be able to close the hole in the heart. Whereas when you have a smaller hole in your heart, they can actually go in through a catheter and close the hole with a mesh plug. But my hole was so huge that they had no choice but to go through open heart surgery. The surgery itself was very successful. The cardiac thoracic surgeon said it was the biggest hole that they had ever seen. I basically did not have a septal wall between my 2 atriums. So they had to rebuild a wall between the 2 chambers of my heart. Surgery went great. Recovery from the hospital actually went great. It wasn't until I got home and 3 weeks later that everything started to go downhill again. And I went into massive heart failure, and I had blood clots and edema, and they were worried about pulmonary hypertension, and just an endless array of things that transpired after the closing of the hole in my heart. And what I attribute that to is that my heart had been operating for 55 years, struggling one way of working, with oxygen coming in and no good oxygen going back out to the organs. So my heart needed to recalibrate. I mean, it's not like you close the hole and then everything is perfect. So it took me a good 3 to 4 years for my heart to recalibrate, working under this new system, if you will. And as a result of that, just a whole lot of things occurred. And so after that, I was diagnosed with severe sleep apnea, stopped breathing 55 times an hour. So how was that never diagnosed all these times I was in the hospital? Severe deviated septum, you know, so no wonder I can't breathe. Not only is there a hole in my heart, but my septum is crooked and I stopped breathing 55 times an hour. So everything was just like one thing after the next. And it's like, wow, 55 years to get to these things that I was born with. So luckily I'm here today to share my story, but it was pretty challenging. And the complications were very, you know, scary, but I just always kept a positive outlook and knew that I was going to pull through. And, you know, it was perfect for me to be in this book, Crappy to Happy, because that's exactly where I was.
I can imagine that transition from that surgery and your body showing you all these new symptoms and signs was really a crappy experience. So you must have come a long way.
Yes.
And I'll be sharing your story.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I've also had plenty of misdiagnoses, and I also have an invisible illness. So I have an autoimmune disease, which went undiagnosed for a very, very long time. And until I began to advocate for myself and go out there and try to merge the two worlds, which if I wouldn't have become a nurse, I wouldn't have even gone into the alternative realm to try and find answers. The interesting thing is when I went to actually get diagnosed by a geneticist, she was like, well, Diane, your pain is pretty much under control. You're doing all these alternative things that are working for you. I think you're on the right track. And I was like, that's interesting. Coming from a medical doctor, because most of the times they don't believe in alternative treatments. On your journey, has it taken you into that alternative realm?
Oh, absolutely. I probably started in my late 20s because I was always seeking answers. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Why is my digestion horrible? Why do I have you know, asthma? Why so many things? Why chronic pain? Why this? Why that? And I sought out every alternative method there was, from acupuncture to energy healing to you know, digestive testing for SIBO and all the saliva tests and the breath test and everything. And, you know, ideally, a lot of those methods helped address the issue, but nothing was going to address the fact that there was a hole in my heart that was causing all of my organs and all of my systems to not operate properly. So until that hole in the heart was discovered, which came after quitting my cardiologist of 35 years and going for a new doctor who found the hole in my heart on the first diagnostic test, nothing else really could start to go through repair and healing until that hole is closed. So since then, I've been doing a lot of alternative methods for healing the digestive tract and the, you know, the chronic pain and the inflammation and all those things. So I'm a huge advocate of alternative health. I know that there's a place for the medical doctors. If I didn't have the hole in my heart closed, I probably would have not survived because my heart was just a big aneurysm. But yeah, I'm with you all the way. In fact, when I read your website, I'm like, ooh, I really like her. I like the stuff that she does. So I'm all for that, definitely. And, you know, every practitioner I went to wanted to know what was the cause for my heart failure. Well, my doctors, my cardiologists, nobody ever had a cause for it because nobody ever knew I had the hole in my heart. So, you know, no wonder I had horrible digestion, because there wasn't enough blood pumping through my body to have healthy digestion. So it's all a cumulative, it was a, you know, such a team effort. And that's why I share on my Facebook and my webpage about my healing partners, because it's not just the doctor that closed the hole in my heart. There's a whole team of holistic healers that was part of my recovery.
I love that you said that, because a lot of people don't realize that when we say we're going into the alternative realm, that it's not going to be one person that supports you. You have to find what works for you on your journey. And that includes combining conventional and alternative, because yes, if you have a medical condition like yours that needs to be corrected with surgery, then you're not going to really get to the root of the problem unless you fix that problem. And then you can start venturing into the alternative realm and see what works for you. Some clients, might like acupuncture. Some clients maybe do better with Reiki, and it depends on the person and them advocating for themselves to actually find what works for them. It's interesting to me that you had digestive issues too, because I don't know if you know, but my book is The Truth About IBS and Anxiety.
Yes.
And in that book, I actually talk about the root cause of symptoms like digestive symptoms and chronic pain in the body, that there's a link between the emotional root, which is the emotions that we have, the self-limiting beliefs that we have from childhood, the things that maybe from birth trauma,
Right.
that are ingrained within our bodies, that actually create symptoms when we're under stress. In my journey, I've noticed that there's a huge connection between my chronic pain and things that happened in my past. And as I've started working with clients to help them understand what is that emotion that's creating this reaction to keep happening, is when really the healing process happens. And I know you did have a traumatic experience, so I want you to explain a little bit about your birth trauma, so we can bring together that there is this connection between emotional and physical stress.
Absolutely. Well, I was the third baby, only girl of my mother. And I was born in 1960. And lo and behold, I came out butt first. So that was called frank breech or double breech. So my bottom appeared first to greet my doctor. And then my legs, as you can imagine, kind of spread like little fans and kind of got stuck in the entryway, if you will. So that was a very traumatic experience. Of course, I don't know anything. And my legs were folded up over my left shoulder. And my left arm was tangled underneath it. And when they pulled my legs down, they just sprung right back up like a rubber band. So according to my mom, of course, there's no pictures from 1960, but according to my mom, my legs sprang back up like rubber bands for quite a while. And I had to wear like 3 or 4 cloth diapers to hold my legs down and wear braces and all that stuff. And so obviously that's a birth trauma that I'm not aware of, but fast forward 55 years, it kind of, it could actually tie all together that, okay, if my legs were crossed over my left shoulder, crushing my heart probably as I came through the birth canal, probably crushing my nose, so I was probably born with a broken nose. They figured out I was born with a broken wrist. I had dislocated hips. So I probably, maybe, I don't want to say broke a hole in my heart, but I mean, it just, the whole place, everything was defective. And as a little tiny baby at 7 pounds, they don't know those things. They didn't know I had a broken wrist. They probably didn't know I had a broken nose. So it's interesting to connect the dots back to see how my birth trauma could have contributed to where I am today, definitely.
I think you did a great job connecting it to it. And I didn't realize how traumatic that was, but that is intense. Like you had so many different things for this little baby.
I
Poor
know.
thing.
I don't feel sorry for me. I always felt sorry for my mom.
Yeah. And the moms really do get a lot of stress from these experiences. I didn't know until a couple of weeks ago that I had a traumatic birth too. So I was supposed to be born on Christmas, but the doctor decided, number one, my dad wasn't coming in the room. Number two, he was getting this baby out as fast as he could.
Yeah.
He put my mom half asleep. And I don't understand how that works, because this was 1977. How do you put a lady to sleep and then somehow she pushes a baby out her vagina? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
But he did that. And then he has to have used tools to get me out. So my birth trauma not only caused stress for my body, but it also caused stress on my mom's body. And knowing what I know and the family history that I have, I am pretty confident that part of that trauma impacted my brain, and learning disabilities developed, and that stress response started all on that day.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, especially if they used triceps back in those days, it's like, we're just talking like great big tongs, that's scary. I'm sure
Yeah,
it, I'm sure it contributes to that. Yeah.
those 4 steps. I mean, we don't know enough
Oh
about
yeah. What did
how
I
these
say?
traumatic births.
I said
Triceps.
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 Forceps.
Yeah.
Ah.
So I have a signature phrase. It's something that I say a lot. And I think it really resonates with your story as well. And I want to know if you have one. So mine is, your medical history doesn't have to be your fate, which makes it basically means you can make the decision to change your life. And you obviously have to start by advocating for yourself. What would you say your signature phrase is?
Well, Diane, I have two of them. The serious one is, it would have been really helpful to know that my heart had a giant hole. And that just is as it relates to all of the issues that I've experienced over the last 55 years. But where I really like to tell my story is the lighthearted approach to living with health challenges, and to always find humor in the situation. And one day before I left for my open heart surgery, when I was still working in the corporate world, my boss said to me, he says, "Oh, you're going to do fine." And after heart surgery, when I went to see him about 8 weeks later, he says, "Oh my gosh, you look great." And I said, "Well, remember, I was defective, not dilapidated." And all I can think of is like, just because I went through open heart surgery doesn't mean I have to look like crap, you know? I still wanted to be that bright person. I still wanted to exude confidence and humor in telling my story. So it just kind of made me think of that Disney movie Cars, you know, the old dilapidated cars. They were happy as can be. And that's kind of how I felt. I'm defective, not dilapidated. So that would be one of
I
them.
love it. That's funny. Actually, now that I think about it, when I started my journey, because I had so many things going wrong, I mean, half of my body was numb for 20 years. So back then, when I first got married to my husband, whenever I had something wrong with me, I would tell him, "Babe, you married a lemon," because I was a lemon. But I would laugh at it, because now I'm not a lemon. I've completely
Oh,
transformed all of that.
not at all. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So we have a few minutes left. We have about 3 minutes. So give us a little bit more about your crappy to happy story before we close it out.
Well, basically, my story talks about how I struggled, you know, with so many health challenges for so many years, and, you know, couldn't run, couldn't climb stairs, never could understand why. Doctors, you know, "Oh, you've got asthma, you've got a heart murmur." It wasn't until I was 23 when I finally got a full-time job, and I didn't pass the new hire physical. And that was kind of like the beginning of, this is probably more serious than just having asthma, you know, throughout my childhood. So I share the story about going through all these challenges, but actually being in my comfort zone with one cardiologist for so many years, because I worked in medical center in public relations. I knew who this doctor was. I was in my comfort zone. I trusted him. I delivered a baby in 1999 that I should not have survived through. If they had known I had a hole in my heart, they would have never had me be in labor for 39 hours. I thought I would die. And it's, you know, the stories, listening to your body. I knew there was something wrong. And when I went to that cardiologist after 35 years, I said, "Look, you need to dig deeper. There is something wrong. I simply cannot breathe. And that's not right for a 42-year-old woman." And he was visibly insulted, I believe. And I worked with a life coach, and I went to see a new doctor, and here I am today with a new cardiologist who I love, a complete medical team that understands who I am and where I'm at. And I just love to share that in the Crappy to Happy book, to offer hope and inspiration to women who face health challenges, that there is hope out there and there is healing, and that you need to do it with humor.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Humor and fun is an essential part of any healing process. I think your story is so inspirational and really shows people that you can go out there and take that extra step. And sometimes you do need a little support system. And that's an amazing thing that you had a life coach to guide you through it.
Yes.
Before we close out, let people know, where can they reach you? What's your website? Any information about
Well,
you.
my website is Wholehearted Courage, and that's whole, H-O-L-E. I also have on LinkedIn, my name is Catherine Paour, and it's spelled P-A-O-U-R. And I also have a Facebook page, Wholehearted Courage. And again, that's whole, H-O-L-E, hearted courage.
Okay, so thank you, Catherine, for joining us on this podcast, Goddess Unleashed. I think you have a very powerful story, and I'm glad you were able to share it here and to be one of the authors on this book. It's so amazing that you have shared your journey and really inspired people to take their health to the next level. This is Diane Vick, Goddess Unleashed, and thank you for listening. Aloha.
Aloha.